Hi, this is your buddy Quinn, and this is the video introduction to the 1988 Italian language film, Cinema Paradiso. Cinema Paradiso is a film by director Giuseppe Tornatore. It's a very beloved film by many people who have seen it. The story of Cinema Paradiso utilizes a sequential flashback structure, in which we see the main protagonist, who in this film is named Salvatore, at different stages of his life. We see him as a child, as a teenager, or as a young man, and as a middle-aged man. Although this is a film that was shot and is set in part in the 1980s, a lot of the film takes place in the years after World War II. And that was a period in which the Italian film industry was really growing and was in ascendancy in much of Europe. It was the period during the development of Italian neorealism. And by the mid-1950s, Italy actually had more cinemas than any other country in Europe. And so the cinema context of this film is in the context of a country that is getting over World War II, where local film houses were extremely important, and where Italian film was really innovative and was extremely popular both in the country and abroad. Italy was, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, still recovering from the devastation of World War II. Many Italian men from rural communities, like the one portrayed in this film, were lost fighting in that war and had a lot of effects on the community development after that. Much of the film of Cinema Paradiso takes place in a little Sicilian town. It's a town much like the one that the director Tornatore grew up in. In fact, most of the film was actually shot in his hometown in Sicily. It is, as a result, a semi-autobiographical film, and the main protagonist, Salvatore, becomes a film director as an adult, much like director Tornatore did himself, coming out of this little Sicilian town. Cinema Paradiso is 2 hours and 3 minutes long. There is also a director's cut, and the director's cut adds 50 minutes. If you're new to the movie, I'd recommend watching the 2-hour version. And then if you love it and want more background, finding a time later to watch the director's cut. The film does have a little bit of sexuality in it. It's not particularly explicit. The director's cut does have a little bit more. The director's cut in that 50 minutes adds some sequences and explanations with respect to the protagonist's love interest that we get a sense of in the regular cut as well. Depending on where you're finding films to stream, Cinema Paradiso could be a little bit trickier to find. It's not available on YouTube to rent, not available traditionally regular streaming rental on Amazon either. But there are 3 ways to stream this film in the United States. You can go to Fandango Now, just go online there and you can easily rent it for streaming. You could go to Redbox online and do the same thing. Or if you go onto Amazon, you will be directed to subscribe to HBO streaming on Amazon. This film is included in the HBO package. So if you have that makes it very easy. If you don't have that, you will be invited to sign up for a free trial. And so if you're interested in that, you can also watch the film through a free trial on HBO streaming through Amazon. By way of background, the director, Giuseppe Tornatore, was actually only in his early 30s when he made this film. It's really quite a remarkable achievement for a young director. This was the second film that he'd ever made. If you pay careful attention, you can actually see the director Tornatore at the end of the film. He makes a cameo appearance as the projectionist at the very end of the film. The soundtrack to this film is important. It was composed by Ennio Morricone. You might remember Ennio Morricone. He's the most famous of the Italian film composers of the 20th century. He also was the composer for the soundtrack to the Battle of Algiers, one of the films that we've looked at earlier in this series. In terms of acting, we really have some great performances here. This is not an Italian neorealism film in the sense that most people in this film are actually traditional stage. There is an awesome child actor, though. His name is Salvatore Cascio. He was a Sicilian boy that was photographed by the director and cast in this film. I love that his name is Salvatore, and he actually plays the young protagonist, Salvatore De Vita, in the film. Salvatore Cascio has not actually worked much as an actor as an adult, but became quite a well-known child actor after this film. There are a couple of French actors in this Italian film as well. So one important actor in the film is Philippe Noiret. Philippe Noiret plays the character of Alfredo. He's the older projectionist at Cinema Paradiso. Because he was French and didn't speak Italian fluently, he actually spoke his lines in French in this film, and it was later dubbed. You might notice that if you pay very careful attention. Noiret will later go on to play other important roles in Italian cinema, though. He plays the poet Pablo Neruda in another great Italian film called Il Postino. The adult version of the protagonist, Salvatore, is also in the film played by a French actor. His name is Jacques Perrin, who has played important roles in French cinema. There are just a couple of pieces of context about the film industry that I think are helpful here, in part because this really is a movie about movies. Before today's age of digital film and digital screenings, when you went to the theater, you actually had a projectionist behind the screen that was in charge of managing reels of film. And in the mid-1900s, nitrate film, which was also known as celluloid, was the primary type of film that was being used on those film reels. It was also, because of the processes by which it was set and composed, it was very combustible. So those celluloid films, those nitrate films, were a fire hazard and were dangerous in some ways. Also, before digital screenings, you were managing reel-to-reel in the projection booth, and sometimes you could splice film. You might cut film. You might cut sequences from a film, for example. You might splice them back together. You might need to splice film to make one larger reel from two smaller reels, or cut a large reel into two pieces, for example. And so a projectionist would need to be able to splice film, which would be to take the actual film, weave it back together using tape, special kind of tape, and would have the ability to edit and cut film directly from the film reel. I actually worked as a film projectionist when I was in college at the same time as this film was coming out. And so I had the privilege of actually being a projectionist on this film. And I remember having to cut pieces of film and then splice them back together using that kind of tape. Given that much of this film is about projection and splicing, it was a lot of fun to be able to do that and to be a projectionist for Cinema Paradiso in the 1990s. There are a few things that I think really make this film particularly special. And it's been widely recognized as an important film. It did win the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in 1989. And it also won the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes that same year. Because it was so internationally well received, it helped to really revive the reputation of Italian cinema. Italian cinema wasn't as well known in the 70s and 80s as it was in the years post-World War II. But this was the first in a series of film that really helped kick off a new revival of critically acclaimed Italian cinema. And we're going to see a number of great Italian films come out in the 1990s. This film is special, I think, in part because of the way it deals with complex human emotion. It's a film about love. It's a film about grief. It's a film about dreams and dreaming big dreams. It's a film about community and who your allies are as you try to fulfill those dreams. What does community mean, and who are your supporters, and what are the quirks of the community that you live in? Much like other Italian films we've looked at, the way that the community responds to problems or to celebrations is very direct and in your face. So we have a number of community scenes in this film. You could compare those to the ones that we've discussed previously in Bicycle Thieves. There is a rural versus urban component here to the tightness of community in rural settings versus some of the alienation that can occur in larger urban settings. We do have a few sequences that take place in this film in Rome. And then there's a lot here about relationships. And we often see relationships, whether it be between mother and child or between others as having some harshness to them, but also a great deal of tenderness. And so that interplay between harshness and tenderness in relationships, I think, is really interesting to watch. The one cinema in this town really becomes a communal focal point, and so film and community are interwoven in this film in ways that, where you're watching this, maybe on TV in your basement in a non-communal setting, you're going to have a very different experience watching it than the folks in this film have when they go to the cinema and have a communal experience that they can talk about with their friends and neighbors for long after that. This is often thought of as a movie that is a celebration of film. Tornatore actually was worried by the 1980s that film was dying, that the cinema was dying, that going to the cinema was dying, and so he was harkening back to that, and he thought of this as potentially a little bit of an obituary to that. Luckily, that hasn't really come to pass. People still enjoy going to the cinema, but film in this movie is both dangerous. It's dangerous in more ways than one, but there's also a great deal of promise to film. I love how the light streaming from the projector in this film streams out of the mouth of a lion, a sculpted lion, which I think symbolically helps to show one of the key themes of the film, which is the danger and promise of movies. I also think one of the special parts of this film is the relationship between the protagonist, Salvatore, as a young man, and a father figure, Alfredo, the projectionist at the theater. And I encourage you to pay attention to that particular relationship. It's one of the highlights. There's tragedy in this film, loss during World War II, and the young boy is searching for his father. And so you can also compare this to the father-son relationship that is so artfully spelled out in Bicycle Thieves. A few things that I invite you to specifically watch out for as you watch the movie. Alfredo, the projectionist, makes the young Salvatore some promises, right? Some of them are bribes. Sometimes he gives him advice, but pay attention to those promises that he gives and the advice that he gives. They're relevant as the film progresses. There's also a lot of bells in this film. I think in a rural Sicilian town, there are bells in general from churches and other places, but the bells provide a nice motif, and there's some symbolism behind there. How might they play a role in providing meaning to the film? I also think that the kiss as an act in a relationship has some symbolic meaning, and so think about its role in this film as well. Some people in this movie are saved in various ways. Who saves whom? Why are they saved? What is the act of saving someone? Is a question that the film raises. One of my favorite lines in the film comes in the second half, where the projectionist, Alfredo, tells his companion, never give in to nostalgia. And I think that's an important line in the film that offers a bit of a key to what the director is trying to do. Never give in to nostalgia. What does that mean? Is it good advice? Or is the director using it ironically? The film is at heart here, I think, a commentary on nostalgia. It's a commentary on memory. What do we remember and why as we go through life? What do we leave behind? And how ultimately do we move forward? If we choose to leave some things behind, how do we progress after that? What do we remember? and what should we choose to forget? What is worth treasuring? What is worth mourning? How do we treasure things? How do we mourn losses? Those are big, big life questions, and questions that I think Cinema Paradiso is really good at asking, and I think it even tries to provide some answers. So I think that you'll enjoy it. I really hope that you do. Cinema Paradiso is a film that's a ton of fun. You should also, I think, bring a tissue.